Hi, I'm Yinka, and this is The Hurt Locker, a podcast where we open a door into men's mental health. Coming up.
And I think because my dad was ill, so he had cancer, his approach to being ill was to just drop everything, go to bed, in the hope it would go away. Got the title, thought, oh, that's a good idea, I'll go with that. And then I was like, oh shit, I'm actually going to talk about these things for the first time in public, you know.
But we don't seem to talk about sex and death.
It's like it's written into our lives, isn't it? It's going to happen one of these days. What is grief if not love without somewhere to go?
And good evening to you, David.
Hello, Yinka. Good to be here.
Welcome to this edition of The Hurt Locker. The Hurt Locker is very much about talking about men's mental health, and it's good to have you this evening.
It's good to be here. It's good to be here and a man that has some vague sort of mental health, I hope.
Oh, we've all got our mental health. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. So the theme today is going to be about grief, particularly your grief.
Yes.
A little segue to your, I think it's still ongoing now, your show that you're on the road with, Good Grief. And the question is, can grief be good?
There's a really good line in, I think it's one of the Marvel films. What is grief if not love without somewhere to go? You know, it's only because you love and you care about the person that you've lost that you feel that grief. And yeah, it's an ongoing balance really to learn how to cope with it. But obviously it's hard, and it's also just good to sort of, you know, to feel what you feel about it, I guess.
I've saw little elements of your show that's currently on the road now, and what struck me about it, well, what was original for me was that as a male, you were talking about your own grief.
Yeah.
The loss of a loved one, your dad, 4 years ago.
Yeah.
I think for me, that takes a lot of bravery.
Yeah.
It takes courage to talk about that, because, and we've done episodes and we'll probably revisit the likes of toxic masculinity, etc. But to talk about one's own emotions and the loss of a loved one.
Yeah.
Basically what I'm asking is, where did the idea and the courage come from to do that?
Well, my dad was my sort of biggest supporter as a performer, but also just as a son, really. And he'd really like supported me doing stand up and comedy. And I when I wanted to be in a band, he'd carry my amp. And when, you know, I wanted to do comedy, he'd come to every gig and everything, you know, and he paid for my drama training, all these kind of things. And so, and he really loved the stand up and he was really into it. And so when I lost him, it felt like the natural thing to do was to then do a show about him, because I'd already did material about him for a while. And it's funny in a way, actually, because a lot of the things that I do material about him and about his worries or about our relationship, and often we wouldn't like discuss these things other than when it happened in a gig and I was telling the story and he's on the receiving end, sort of thing. But yeah, I sort of, it felt like the natural thing to do. I mean, obviously at the same time, it was also kind of terrifying because, I mean, he died just before I was due to go to Edinburgh the previous year, and I'd hoped to still go, but then various things happened. I had to cancel. But you have this thing when you go, well, okay, I'm going to focus on him and I'm going to focus on losing him. And I'm also, because I had to break contact with my mum due to a sort of emotional abuse thing that sort of came out as a result of the loss of my dad. It became more obvious that was happening. So it was all still very raw. And there you are, you know, you've agreed to the title, you've agreed to the, you know, the blurb for your show in Edinburgh. So you're like, I'm doing this. And then you're like, but am I actually ready to do this? You know, because it was all just still very raw. And because of the previous show I did, which was about depression particularly, well, it featured it a lot. It was called David Ephgrave, My Part in His Downfall. And I sort of talked about, you know, how I get in the way of myself sort of thing. But it was the same with that. You know, I got the title, thought, oh, that's a good idea, I'll go with that. And then I was like, oh shit, I'm actually going to talk about these things for the first time in public, you know. So I kind of wasn't ready, but I just thought, well, sod it, here's a reason to do it. And kind of and as a result, it became really useful for me. But yeah, it was the same with the grief thing, really. It was like, am I ready to talk about this? How's it going to be focusing on this every day in Edinburgh for a month, And in the end, it really was the right thing to do. And it was kind of really sort of cathartic for me. But yeah, I guess it's just that thing of you start with the title and then you go, well, I'll deal with how I feel about it when I get to it. So yeah, it was difficult. It was challenging, but ultimately it kind of brought me closer to him in a weird way.
You do mention that in your show, and you've used the word, It was quite cathartic. Imagining doing that for a month solidly, you're really drilling down in terms of your emotions.
Yeah.
And how you feel about the loss.
Yeah, absolutely.
How was it received by the audience? How has it been received?
I'd say really well, actually. And it's a weird thing as well, in the sense, though, that when I kind of wrote it, I kind of thought, have I really written anything? Because I'm just kind of telling stories about my dad. Is it funny? Is it comedy? Is there actually anything sort of to it? But what it was just like getting a step closer to being more honest, to be honest, about myself and how I felt. And in doing that, I mean, it's a funny thing. It's like when I did the show about depression. So I start early on by saying that I suffer from it and I was under a mental health team and the rest of it. And it kind of forces the audience to listen because, sometimes they're just so distracted by what's going around. When you say something like that, they're kind of like, well, we're in a small room. He said that to us. I kind of have to listen now. And as a result, they kind of get on board quicker and it becomes sort of easier, in a weird way. So having done that, it was the same thing with the thing about my dad. It's like, well, I'm going to talk about this. This is what it is. And also the people coming, they know what it's about because they know what they're coming for. So it's sort of okay to do it. But yeah, and so as a result, I think it's a weird one because I say it almost feels like there isn't something written, but I felt more connection with an audience than I think I've ever done with anything else I've ever done by being more honest about it in a way. And, because we all have these people in our lives or we lose these people, we all know what it's like to lose someone. We all, even if we haven't lost someone, the concept of it, it's like it's written into our lives, isn't it? It's going to happen one of these days. So, it's just a part of being a human being. And yeah, if you can get a laugh as well out of some of the difficult stuff, then...
Okay, that sounds like a tick.
Absolutely.
I think for me, and I have mentioned it, is the fact that intimacy, we're here because of intimacy. We're all inevitably going to die. But we don't seem to talk about sex and death. No,
it's very true.
It's like the last two taboo subjects.
Yeah, I know. I kind of talk about it in the show. I say, like, it's bizarre. Our main issue with death is we basically act like it's not going to happen. We just avoid the subject like it's going to go away, and, it won't. So, and I think because my dad was ill, so he had cancer for a number of years, and there was a sort of deterioration, although it was fairly sort of gradual. But that gave us a bit of time to consider what was coming, and it doesn't necessarily make it any easier. But it just meant, and my dad, being, so you sort of say about toxic masculinity, wasn't so much to that, but he was just a guy of his generation. So he...
Absolutely.
He was born in 1946 and he didn't really talk about his feelings and and his approach to being ill was to just drop everything, go to bed and just really focus on that illness in the hope it would go away and then not look after himself. So there was a lot of having to go against what he would naturally do, do you know what I mean, to help him through it. But we became closer, I think, in going through that, and but yeah, it's a thing that we don't focus, we don't give the time, and it doesn't make it any easier to do that, In
your show, you speak about when he was rushed to hospital and they gave him this expensive drug, as it were, yes. And then he had an additional year more to his life. And then you then go on to talk about, we started to have conversations then. And I'm wondering, what type of conversations, if you don't mind sharing, would you have?
The weirdest thing about that whole thing was, so like you were sort of saying then, this particular day, I was told he was going to die that day. Basically, we'd not heard from him for a while. And he was on warfarin at the time and he wasn't really looking after himself. He was going through chemo or just recovering from chemo. And so we had to basically break the door down, get the police to break the door down to find if he was okay. and he'd had a brain bleed, which had been as a result of being on this warfarin. And then, as I say, they showed me a scan of his head on the screen, having rushed him to A&E and said, look, we'll be honest, he's not going to make it through the day. You know, there's the extent of the bleed in his head. So you're suddenly thrown from 0 to, 120 miles an hour without any real time to consider it. But then, so yeah, they gave him this drug towards the end of the day, really just to ease his suffering. And it did miraculously. He woke up, he was lucid and he was fine. And then, as I say, had this whole other year. So you were just like prepping yourself to essentially say goodbye. And then, and then that happened.
Are there any other memories you'd like to share of that difficult time?
When my dad said to me, and this is a big thing for a person like him to say, he said that I made him feel less afraid when he was worrying about the things that were coming, all those sort of things, the illness he was going through. He'd take me with him to appointments and stuff, and he said the way I'd talk to him, it would make him feel less afraid. And obviously that's a huge thing for someone to say, least of all your dad to you as a son, and when he was the guy he was and the age he was. And I think in a weird way, because I knew I was a bit more more naturally like organised than he was, I was like, well, I can do something. I can write down the stuff in the appointments. I can organise things for him to hopefully make things easier. So I guess, so that was one of the things we talked about, but also it was just like, we just got thrown into this thing of how do we deal with it, and I'm not saying it was all easy, because also he could be an absolute, as I say in the show, a pain in the arse, and had no patience for anyone else, while you had to have extreme patience for him at every time. He was so unclear. He'd explain things in ways you did not know what he was talking about. And then he'd be pissed off with you when you didn't understand him, you just had to deal. But then you go, I get that he was frightened and he wasn't feeling well and all those sort of things. And also, he was just my dad. That's the way he was. But yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to make him, as I say, the thing that he said, really, less afraid. I wanted to make him as well as he could be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I just wanted to support him. It's inbuilt, isn't it? You just want to he did so much. It's not even that, you say, oh, he did so much for me. I'm not doing it because he did stuff for me. I'm doing it because I love him. I loved him. And I just wanted him to be okay. And obviously he couldn't be completely okay, but I could at least, make him be the best version, the best way he could be at that time. And that's all I wanted to do, really.
Do you look back over that period of time and do you ever question or say to yourself, if only, or should I have done this, or I could have done that better? Basically, I'm asking you, are you critical of yourself now that he's passed?
Yeah.
You've just said yeah, so I'm going to ask you to expand on that, but also why?
Well, my basic makeup is such that I'm extremely self-critical.
Please, go on.
And, being someone who suffered from depression and the rest of it, it's this kind of, you treat yourself not like you treat anyone else on the planet. You know what I mean? That you would never, ever speak to other people the way you speak to yourself when you have that sort of mindset. So even though, I've worked on that and I've had therapy and I'm on antidepressants and all those things that you do, it's still like your muscle memory goes there, particularly if you're tired or you're stressed or the rest of it, or if you're talking about or thinking about a difficult thing. So yeah, absolutely.
I can hear that it was a difficult time. Are there any other memories that come to mind?
Well, so in the last month of my dad's life, he was at home. I had like a hospital bed downstairs and had like carers coming. And so he'd spent most of his life when he was ill. Like I say, he would just drop everything. If he had a cold, he would just really focus on that cold and and sort of prolong it by being in the bed with the lights off and everything, just really focusing on it. I say in the show, it's like the most negative version of mindfulness, just really thinking about that illness and watching the germs swarm, But anyway, so during that time, and we were like being run ragged trying to look after him, and me, like I say, doing my thing. If he needed things, I'd be on like Amazon Prime and, other shops are available. online shops. But yeah, like, oh, he needs this. He needs a new tablet box. He needs this. I'll see what I can find. And there was like a nice moment where, so my dad, you know, he really was not in a good way. We were coming towards the end, but he was watching me do that and, you know, work on the computer. And he said to my mum next to him, he said, he's good at this, isn't he? And my mum, being her, was like, well, you know, so am I. But it was just like a nice moment where, like, you know, I wasn't really doing anything particularly amazing. I was just, you know, trying to buy what he needed and just, you know, doing what I could. But it obviously meant a lot to him, and it obviously was helping. And irrespective of whether, you know, if there were times when he wasn't getting out of bed or he was, you know, not really looking after himself, it was just a nice moment of him saying thank you and being appreciative for whatever little thing I was doing. So I suppose if I critique myself, which I do all the time, little moments like that at least remind me that, you know, he was grateful for what I was doing. And also it's the thing as well, like doing a show about him, that would have blown his mind. Because even though, like, I would, you know, do material about him and talk about it, the idea that I would spend an hour, as I say, in Edinburgh, and then for a month doing a show that was about him, with him on the poster, it just would have blown his mind, you know. And so even with that, you know, when you say about being hard on yourself or like critiquing yourself, when I was doing it, I'd go, well, would he like this? Would he appreciate me telling these stories? You know, would he be happy and be like talking about such personal things as his death, you know? But like I say, I think we always used like comedy gigs and him coming to the gigs and laughing about the things that he'd been worrying about. So there's a thing I do about it. My dad had a hernia for 30 years and was worried about it, but didn't tell anyone for 30 years.
Wow. He literally kept it in all that time. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. It really, truly unbelievable. And it was only when he was sort of saying to me about it, so he like owned up that he'd found this lump. And I was like, oh, when did you first notice it? And he said, oh, I noticed it when I was closing the garage door of our house in Wellington Road in Stevenage, which we'd moved out of in 1983. So you're like, okay. And you're like, and so he wouldn't tell the doctor, but he'd tell you. And you'd be like, well, if you've had it for 30 years and you're still here, you're probably going to be all right. But he'd been so worried about that for so long. And then eventually he did tell the doctor it was just a hernia. It wasn't a problem. But I told that story in material, and he was in absolute stitches at the back with his friends, just, you know, really just laughing and about something that he'd been worried about for a big chunk of his life, you know. And so that is the thing that makes me go, so he'd be all right with it, you know. And one of the things I sort of thought when I wrote the show was that I wanted people to feel like they'd met him. I want them to come to the show and feel like they met my dad. That was my sort of aim. And I hope that's what I got across, really. But yeah, I just think even though he could be difficult and he was blunt and he was frustrating as hell and all those things that, you know, any relationship you have with someone for that long, you know, that's the way it goes. But he also would never have dreamt of being made the focus, you know. And so I think he deserved it for that reason, really.
When you spoke at the beginning about effectively what I read was he was your biggest cheerleader. He'd come to you with gigs. He'd help you with the humping and dumping, amps, whatever.
Yeah.
There was a part of me that, well, I'll be honest with you, I was envious of that.
Right, yeah.
Because that father-son relationship, you know, it's not something that I've ever experienced, you know.
Right, yeah.
And so, I don't know. I think a part of me wanted to explore that a little bit more. What was that like? Yeah.
Well, I mean,
I'm putting that on your toes now. I know we're doing a podcast. Those connections, sometimes people take them for granted.
Yeah, but that's cool. I mean, you know, I am sort of giving the Disney version of it. It wasn't all like that, you know, by any stretch of the imagination. And also, so like my parents split up when I was quite young, and there was a big period in my life where my dad wasn't really in it a great deal. And so he was kind of keeping out of the way, partly to do with the situation my mum was in and stuff. because he still loved my mum, but like, she was sort of with other people and various things going on. So there were long periods of my life where he wasn't really there, other than probably the things like the amp carrying and those sort of things, because that was what he could do, or like, paying for something, or So it was a weird thing where I think we became like friends after when I was like an adult and when I left home, and then because I was an actor and I was on tour and stuff, and because I did a lot and I've done a lot because I'm a musician as well, like actor muso shows, so like rock and roll shows. I played Buddy Holly for quite a while and played Paul McCartney in the show. And my dad loved like rock and roll and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So like we connected on that, and he was really into that. And his first single that he owned was Raining in My Heart by Buddy Holly. And
yeah.
So we'd already sort of a bit like connected over that when I was like a kid and a teenager. But then I was playing those songs in shows, and he loved it all. So that we sort of became friends in that way. And then it's that thing where, and because with my mum being the sort of figure she was in my life, just kind of took over in many ways. Just was very sort of overbearing and challenging. It meant that my dad kind of got pushed a bit out of the way. And also it was very much made like my dad was like the villain in the piece by my mum. And then you realise, do you know what? No, he wasn't. He was just trying to keep out of the way. And, he did it. So we were that close. We weren't always that close. But I do realise now, it's that thing they always say, isn't it? But I realise retrospectively how lucky I was, particularly with the stuff that followed with my mum and like just all manner of gaslighting, all this kind of terrible stuff going on. But anyway, it made me realise how sort of, I don't know, lucky I was with my relationship with my dad, that if I hadn't had him as that kind of more like normality, I just don't know really what I'd be doing, where I'd be. So
I take the show as a homage to your father.
Yeah.
It's you're bequeathing to the world. This is my love for my dad.
Yeah. I that's probably true.
David, perhaps I'm making an assumption here, but can I ask if these thoughts and feelings changed at all as you were developing your act, your performance, as you were drilling down into the grief, the emotions you felt with your dad's passing?
This is what I've learned, I've learned about the more honest you are. And that's the thing, the more truthful you are. It doesn't have to be like some amazing Hollywood story, you know what I mean? But the fact that it's true.
It's true for you. That's all that matters.
Yeah. And I think if they can hear that you're telling the truth, the audience, they connect with it. And so like you were sort of saying before about, feeling brave enough to do it and what made you say you could do it. I mean, it was hard. Like, so every day, as I say, for a month, for an hour at least, I was focusing on this stuff. And it's a weird thing. Like, there were bits in the show. So like, there's a bit at the end where, because my dad was an artist, like an amateur artist, and he was really, really good. And he used to go to like an art club and stuff. And he sort of found this again in the last few years of his life. So even though he wasn't like really engaging with a lot of things, he was meeting up with some of his mates who all painted and drew, and they'd like go somewhere nice, like there's a windmill or something, and they'd have a laugh together and they'd draw and stuff. And so he sort of found it again. And so at his funeral, and I did the eulogy, and I also told the 30-year hernia story there because I knew that again he would be laughing at that, and it's and he would be pleased that I was trying to make people laugh with something about him, but anyway, like, so one of the people there was a member of my dad's art club, and she came up to me and said, I was in art club, I've got a drawing of your dad that I did, like when he just happened to model one day like years ago, and she gave it to, do you want to see it? I thought, of course. And I opened the folder, and there's this like perfect like charcoal drawing of my dad, and it's just him. And I say in the show that, like, in a weird way, eventually that actually helped me with my grief, because it told me my dad could be anywhere, because you can just do a line drawing if you have the talent and he's there, And so in the show, I say that, and I got someone to animate it so the drawing happens on like a projection. But things like that picture I'd find it quite hard to look at it because I wasn't in show mindset, and you just, you're tired and you're stressed and you're in Edinburgh and you're working really hard and, you're losing money every second and, you're just working really intensely on something. It's kind of hard to then be confronted with the face of the person that you're talking about every day that you haven't seen for 3 or 4 years and the rest of it, and who also came to that venue, so my dad had been there and there I'm in that same space talking about him. But then as time went on, I definitely came out the other side of that month feeling a lot more settled about all of it, really, about, like you said, about whether you did enough or whether, I'm not saying that it made me feel I did do enough all the time or whatever, but it definitely helped me deal with it because it was this well, for a month, this is what I'm here for. And it doesn't mean that, you're all settled now, because sometimes it takes you by surprise. That's the thing with grief all the time. When you're least expecting it, it'll hit you.
Yes, absolutely.
The smallest, stupidest things,
Absolutely.
But like I said, that thing about the Marvel thing about what is grief, if just love without, the place for it to go. It's just because you care about this person and you want, they mean so much to you that it hurts. But I'm glad that I took the risk, if you like, because it was good. It was good therapy in of itself. In fact, funnily enough, there's a bit in the show where I talk about, so this to do with my mum. I give the backstory. I don't know if you saw this bit, but the potted version of all the terrible stuff, and I read it. And this was genuinely something I wrote, not to be used for anything. It was my trying to get down what had happened, all this sort of narcissistic thing that had been going on and the things I've been made to do as a child. So never had any intention for any kind of material. But I thought to say this stuff about her and stuff in the show, I have to say some of it. So I go, well, I'll tell you this, but because I know it's hard listening, I'll lighten the mood. And then I have Spanish Flea, silly 70s, dun, 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 while I'm reading all this really terrible stuff. And then I get into it and I start dancing. And this is genuinely true, but I sort of said it. I was all this time I'd spent therapy and the rest of it, all I needed to do was go to Edinburgh for a month and do that every day for a month to that soundtrack. I was fixed now. Do you know what I mean? It's just, and it's just silly because you go, like I say, I wrote that really earnestly, this is my, my trauma. And there I was reading it to a stupid soundtrack and dancing to it.
An observation, as we've been talking, I just noticed, observing your eyes, the way you're so reflective.
Right.
About what you say. And in some ways, I can see some of that hurt and pain.
Right, yeah, yeah.
From yesteryear,
Right, yeah.
And you bravely mentioned, I'd say this, I've shared the podcast with a number of comedians, and a theme that comes up a lot with a lot of the comedians that I've spoken with is depression. You've spoken about that.
Yeah.
Just tentatively. And I think for me, exploring depression, the fact that you even mentioned it is good in of itself, because you can be a successful individual, applying your trade, but still be consumed, beset by the things which can neutralize and paralyze us at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah. And I did not talk for many, many years. It was an exercise in not letting anyone know. It was all about no one must know.
What would happen if they knew? What was going on in your critical mind if they knew?
If they knew, then, because I feel, my brain was I know the truth about me. I know the truth about the fact that I don't deserve whatever it might be, to exist on a very basic, brutal level. And yeah, it was all about concealing it. And all that did was make it worse and worse and worse, because you're compounding it by working so hard to be something other than what you are. It's like there's, the metaphor of the swan on the water, and it's all smooth, but underneath,
Yes.
Yeah. And that's what it's like. And so, and I was doing that, and then I was putting an act on top of that. And then if I was working as an actor or whatever, I was putting another act on top of that. And it was just completely wearing me into the ground, this sort of effort to try and conceal it. And even though everyone always says, oh, it's best to talk about it, and you don't, and it's, you might say that to everyone else, but again, you don't apply it to yourself because you're the exception, and you know the secret about you, and you mustn't let anyone else know. It's just ridiculous, really. You're asking the same brain that isn't well to look after yourself and to not think those things. You know what I mean? It's very hard to sort of separate those two things. And I was open to my wife about it, even when we first got together. We've been together 18 years, but married for 9. And one of the first things I said to her, funnily enough, was that I suffer from depression. So that threw her straight in.
You know what? Thank you for sharing that. Can I ask, how did she respond to that?
It made more sense. That was the beginning of not just concealing it. And then she said to me, okay, well, you've said this and you're suffering from it, but you're not taking any help. You need to take some help,
Okay.
And again, I had every reason to say, no, I don't, or, or whatever it might be. I was afraid of antidepressants, for example, thought it would change me. Well, actually, I probably needed some changing because I wasn't coping, Whatever time it takes, whatever route you have to take to get to the point where you go, hang on a minute, this isn't right. This is not, this is not healthy. Led to the point of me being more honest about it and realizing, like I say, so doing this show, my part in his downfall, and knowing what I'm going to have to say, that I suffer from depression and blah, 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 and the first time I did that, it was sod's law as well, because I had all these previews in my diary in different places. So I was like, I'll tell these stories, but I'll tell them somewhere where people won't know me. So if it doesn't work or it's not funny, or I can just pretend that never happened and no one need know. And then for various reasons, all those dates were cancelled. So the first time I did it was in my hometown in my own comedy club. You're like, fuck it. And you're just like, and so I hadn't told any of these stories. And there I was starting the show with it, Like the admin of depression and how ridiculous it can be. So I used to go once a week to the mental health unit in Stevenage for my appointments. And I say, that's a bleak address, mental health unit in Stevenage, And the ridiculous thing was I'd be waiting for my appointment and they'd have like Smooth FM playing. And there'd be someone behind the desk. And some of the songs you would hear as you're waiting to go in, you're like, you'd expect them to have like an emergency panic button. I just press it to music. So like All By Myself was one of them.
A little dumper button straight away as soon as...
Exactly. Shit, no, close the thing down, yeah. And there was I Can't Live If Living Is Without You. That played when I was waiting to go in. Hotel California, so you're about to go into the mental health unit where you might be sectioned. You'll never leave. And you're just like... And it's like no one else seems to notice this.
I'm imagining a vulnerable state when you felt less resistant to support. Can you recall how that felt in that moment? How did that feel then?
Well, it felt okay. I mean, I suppose the thing was that when I was at the appointments and stuff, I was like, well, I'm here. I might as well use this appointment to actually try and help myself. That's why I'm here, and they're so hard to get half the time. Particularly under the NHS, just because of how stretched they are.
Absolutely.
So having that, and particularly like having talk therapy, and I was very lucky actually with the guy that I saw, because he was officially a drama therapist, but I'm an actor, so it's like, oh god, that's like the worst. That's the last thing I want to do is like pretend to open a door and go, it's and also just being a performer. It's weird, like you can be a performer, but also if you can avoid performing at any time, great. It's just laziness, really. But I was lucky because he got quite early on that I wasn't really gonna go down. That wasn't really working for me, but talking did work for me.
Yes.
Yeah, and it helped so much. And then like really literally directly it became like, so the ridiculous thing was there was one particular day, so I did my first solo show. So I one off of a double act. I'd been doing that for like quite a while, but I'd never done stand-up on my own. And it just so happened when I was in therapy, I'd booked some dates on the Brighton Fringe, and it was the first time I'd done anything on my own. I think it was something like I had a show the day before my appointment, then I had a day off and I had my appointment, and then I went back the next day. to carry on with the show. And I was like so excited about, I've done this thing, you know, and telling him about it. And then it just so happened on my first show, a member of the comedy press, who is an arsehole, was there and reviewed it and completely took me to pieces. I mean, like really personal and like, you know, just brutal, when it's supposed to be like a work in progress gig, you know, in a little room above a pub. And so I come out of this appointment and then happened to check my phone, and the review had come in, and I read that, and it's like, oh God, he knows the truth about me, you know. So this thing about, irrespective of all the times when people are on side or, you know, like you or whatever it is, it's the one person who says the negative thing that you go, well, that's the truth.
That we fixate on, yeah.
And it nearly stopped me. It nearly stopped me doing it. But I, you know, then I eventually got to the point where I take the review apart in the show My Partner's Downfall. You know, he described my show as 45 minutes of that's I don't know how to say that, because the show actually came in at 53 minutes. So does that, you know, does that, you know, is that big? Yeah, just like, you just have to, like, you know, it's not even like, you know, I'll point out the joke so no one notices me. It's like, you might as well just be honest about it. And what would happen in this show when I eventually told the story, I said, you know, now if he reviews me again and he comes to the show, then fine. Because what I wanted to see is, you know, 4 years ago, whatever, I nearly stopped doing it. But here I am still fucking doing it. So, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And that would get, like, again, it's the honesty. You get like often a round of applause, and you go, well, there you go. I've just completely, like, cut out that cancer.
Absolutely. Cauterize it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I do things like I'd zoom in on the review, like the typos and stuff. It's like, you know, if you're going to insult me, just fucking proofread your thing, you know. And you just, so, and I'm a real believer in that, I think, now even more so, but to just shine a light on it, you know, just
good.
Yeah. And it's not to say that I still, at my worst, I still will sometimes believe that everything he said is true, because it's convenient to have, you know, that as the reason to think that. But also the idea that reviewers, the idea that, you know, someone who doesn't actually do any of these things but just tells you whether something is good or not, you don't need that, because you just find that for yourself. What is the point? And the sad thing is, when you're starting out, so he runs the, like, main comedy website, so I'm really signposting who this person is now. That had a much further reach than I had with my little show in a little fringe venue. So you're like, you know, you've told, and also the weird thing was, this review told a lot of my stories as well, so it sort of killed the gags. And you're like, well, how can I compete with this, you know? But then I thought, fuck it, ultimately. And again, with the help of the therapy and stuff, I got around it. And as I say, in the end, I just talked about it.
Comedy is like a release for so many of us when we're watching it, including myself. But was it, as they say, like a medicine for you as a writer and performer?
There's a lot to be said for using laughter, like I said about my dad, you know, like talking about the things he'd worried about, and him laughing about it, and it releasing him from it and releasing me from it. I don't know, it takes the sting away from so many things.
Absolutely.
You know, even like I say, it's so important. I think that's so important. And the thing is that it takes everyone their own length of time to find that for themselves. Because even though, as I say, it's become more fashionable to say, oh, it's okay to talk about things, or, you know, you still feel like the exception.
Always.
Yeah.
I think we interviewed a big New Yorker, Jim Mendrinos. He was talking about when he first started talking about his mental health.
Right, okay.
He was afraid that he wouldn't get any gigs.
Yeah.
That may be a possibility, you know, that was his biggest fear. And then subsequently, through our podcast, he spoke about his personal challenges with regards thoughts of suicide, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he was very honest by saying that I've never spoke about this on the stage before. Right. And maybe that's something that I need to look at, to visit, as it were.
Right, yeah.
And I think, you know, for all of you as comedians, that authenticity, that honesty, Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, what we do naturally as human beings is we are drawn to stories, aren't we? You know, we spend our whole lives watching or listening to, you know, stories, watching films, but investing in someone else's story. And it doesn't have to be, like I say, some big Hollywood thing. It's just we're just interested. We are interested as people. So I think the exploring it and the being honest about it feels like the right thing to do. And it's this weird thing. So like I'm a bit odd, but then probably not odd with a lot of performers. Like I feel more comfortable telling a story on stage or doing that than I feel in day-to-day life. I feel like day-to-day life, because I don't have control of the parameters. I just seem to have a face and a way that creates confusion. It doesn't matter what I'm saying, it's how it's read is just confused, you know. And yet give me like an hour on stage with a microphone. I mean, the whole process leading up to it is terrifying and terrible, and you don't think you're funny, and you spend a lot of time in a room on your own telling these stories and just going, why am I doing this? But then when you do it in the room and people get on board with it, it's just the most rewarding thing. And I feel more comfortable doing that than when that gig ends and then I go back to, you know, stumbling through my life in the way that I do.
I don't think you stumble through your life. That's not fair.
To be fair, you've only had a very limited experience of me today. But yeah.
But I don't think you stumble through life, you know. Can I ask, you've paid homage to your dad. Would you do the same for your mum?
Well, you wouldn't believe it if I did. To be fair, so the show, the Good Grief show, is kind of first 40 minutes is him. Then there's probably it's 35 minutes ish. Then there's about, I don't know. I'm not going to do the maths to make up an hour now.
Don't worry about that.
Basically, what I'm saying is, you know, the vast majority is my dad. Then I do some stuff about my mum, and then I go back to sort of sum up. But the thing is that, like, it's weird, and I say, and I should be careful what I say because walls have ears, and my mum, you know, my mum's like literally. I mean, when you're doing a podcast, it's not that people aren't going to hear. But yeah, I say in the show when I do talk about mum, I say this is a subject that's genuinely more difficult than talking about death, and so because when you're dealing with sort of manipulation and from a parent that you should trust and you have trusted. So you said about me like looking like I consider, if you like, you know, think about what I say before I say it. Or it's because for many years I was not allowed to talk about what was happening with my mum and the relationships and all these things that were going on. I was just not allowed, and because it was my mum who was my parent and my dad wasn't there, you don't question at that point. It's just you can't afford as a child who's very small to question whether this is right, because the whole world will fall apart if you start not trusting, you know. And so it took a lot, even though things didn't quite add up. I thought it was all my fault.
Wow.
I had to fix it, and my dad didn't know about most of that.
Did you ever tell him?
Not directly, no. Although, this is a big thing. And again, this is like kudos to my dad for being like the legend. There was a time when I met up with him we went for lunch, like to a pub. And with my dad, if there was something on his mind he wanted to say, a bit like the 30-year hernia, it would take him a good few years to work up to, you know. It would normally be as you stepped out of the car that he would say something that had obviously been on his mind for ages. But this particular time, he just said, "Did you ever feel that I abandoned you? Did I abandon you?" Yeah. And you're like, "My God, that's a big, you know." And I think, as I say, kudos to the man. He said that with the risk that I might go, "Yes," you know, and to be brave enough to ask a question that he obviously felt that he did. And I said, "No, I didn't feel that. All I could say is that the years you weren't there, they were bad. They were hard." You know, I sort of intimated about the relationship that was going on in the house where I was secondary to this like chaotic relationship, you know. And I used to put things, and I do talk about this in that terrible monologue that I dance to, you know, Spanish Flea while I say it. But I used to feel so unsafe in my house because of the atmosphere that was there when my dad wasn't there. I used to put toys in front of my bedroom door as like a warning, even though no one had ever I'd never been physically affected, but I didn't feel safe in my own room. And I did that as like a warning. And I still did that as an adult after I left home because it was so ingrained. But no, I never got to tell him directly. And when the things that happened in the fallout after my dad's death with my mum, to the extent of, so I'll give you a very grim example. I said to my wife I wouldn't talk about these things. Here I am talking about these things. But hopefully she doesn't listen to my stuff, so she won't know. My mum walked off from my dad's burial. Seconds after I put the ashes in the grave, I stood up. So they were a small family. She walked off, got in a car, drove away without saying goodbye to anyone. So it was still essentially happening. Didn't hear from her for a fortnight. And then when I spoke, so I'd had nothing from her, no message, nothing, no explanation, and said goodbye. And then when I next spoke to her a fortnight after, and said, that was really hard to deal with, she denied that she'd walked off. So, well, I didn't walk off. I didn't. And you're like, so you're dealing with you couldn't even have any kind of degree of reality, and this weirdly, the gaslighting thing is weirdly successful a tactic, because normally if you have any kind of if you have an argument with someone, you might say something and then they kind of listen to it and they counter with something else. But when somebody just keeps doubling down on no, that didn't happen, you just kind of go, well, so that's what that's an extreme version, but my childhood was all about my mum and her relationships, and no one was allowed to know. My dad wasn't allowed to know. My friends weren't allowed to know. And so I had all this weight on me because I'm an only child as well, and no one to talk to about it. And my dad was trying to keep away just to give my mum space, but didn't know that this was the situation I was in. And then so my mum got married a year before my dad died and didn't tell him. And she told me she was going to get married. And I said, well, look, I support you and I'll be there, but you just got to tell Dad. And she's like, well, I can't. He doesn't know. And the woman that she'd been living with for 20 years. It's like, he does know. But if you got to tell him, and don't make me lie again. I had to lie, as a kid. I can't do this again, and then to cut a long story short, she said she'd tell him, but after the event, and then she didn't, and my dad got more real. But I went to the wedding as a witness. I said, well, I feel like I can't not be there because you're my mum, but you must tell him. And so I went through all of that stuff, and I was there at this wedding with the two people that had made my childhood feel like put stuff in front of the door to make myself feel safe. And I learned that it was for no reason because my mum didn't appreciate it. She was within a year walking off from my dad's burial. I would solicitor's letters saying the only reason I was questioning is I was trying to buy my dad's house to protect it, and half had been left to her. And I had a letter saying the only reason that I was questioning this from the solicitor, the only reason they think I was questioning this was because my mum was gay, so implying that I was homophobic as well. And
wow,
which you imagine receiving that letter, but so I went through all this shit, and you suddenly feel like if I told my dad all of this, if I'd just gone, well, look, I'm going to tell him that it might have. So, because as a result, my dad didn't quite get his wishes as he wanted. He'd left these things to my mum and to me as well. But the house that I wanted, my dad grew up in, been in the family since the 40s. I was just trying to protect it from being sold. And I was watching all this stuff disappear because I trusted that, my mum or whoever wouldn't do that. And my dad, you feel like this is my dad's life and his estate and all of his things. And he's not having a say, you know what I mean? And he would, last thing he would want is this. But throw in talking about grief and talking about my dad, I was also tentatively talking about this stuff in the show as well, knowing that if I say anything, it can cause the whole thing to slow down and be worse. So this is a long, drawn-out answer to you saying, would I ever do it about my mum? I sort of have, and I would write about it more in future. But the thing is, what I've found is the last few years have been very solidly about this stuff. I need a bit of a break from that now, because it was such a roller coaster of just like I say, your mum walking off from the burial or a letter like that, things I never dreamt I'd have to deal with. I thought all the shit happened in my childhood, and then, you know, that was long distant. I learned that and so it's like, maybe I'll get there, but right now I just need a sort of a break from it. But the thing is, I managed to get laughs as well for myself out of some of that really grim stuff. And again, it's like, well, if I can turn that pain, as wanky as it sounds, but that pain into something positive.
What I'm hearing is you found the way creatively whereby that pain, that suffering doesn't dominate every facet of your being, not controlling you.
Some of the time, but yeah.
Okay.
But that's better than none of the time. And I guess I'm telling my dad about that as well when I'm talking about stuff. But I'm able to still go, but let's make the focus my dad, and let's make the focus the good that he did. You know what I mean? And so the irony is, so I end the show because there was the thing when I used to do the buddy show. We'd do a dedication during the show. We'd sing Peggy Sue Got Married, and before that I'd like so I'm Buddy Holly. The house lights would go up, and I'd find like an old couple in the audience who had a big wedding anniversary, and then, you know, we'd dedicate the song to them. And my mum, needing everything to be about her, as it seemed, she'd said to my mother-in-law when they were at the show at the same time, she said, "Well, he's never dedicated it to me." And it's like, but because I'm not your son here, I'm Buddy Holly, and it's what did But I end my show with singing the Chaz and Dave song, "Ain't No Pleasing You."
Ain't no pleasing you, indeed.
Which is and I did it. There's finally did a dedication to my mum. She gets it, you know. She gets it at the end. Even that is an act of you have really damaged my life. You know, my mum. The reason for much of my depression and my doubt, my self-doubt. You know, your parents should hopefully be nourishing you and encouraging you to be the person you want to be. I know, like you said, for yourself, you didn't necessarily maybe have that, but that's kind of the goal. But what I've done is kind of despite my mum, and she inbuilt all that sort of lack of safety. That's the reason why it happened. So, but I've managed to, on my own terms, work on that and try to fix it, or try to not fix it. You don't fix it, but you know what I mean. Try to look after myself and take a more healthy approach. And then I started to talk about it a bit more, publicly as well as privately. And then I go, well, I'll tell the story, because the fact is that now I've had to break contact means I'm allowed to say things that I never would have said otherwise.
Absolutely. You know what? I'm tilting my head left and right. And I'm thinking, and I'm looking at you, observing as you're talking, and you're such a reflective individual. You really, and I see that as a positive. I really do see that as a positive. What you've shared is powerful.
Oh, thanks.
100%, it's powerful.
Oh, well, thank you.
I think sometimes guys get a lot of bad press as fathers.
Yeah.
The full picture isn't really spoken about.
No, yeah.
And what your dad did, he stepped away so that there would be reduced dramas, at least for you.
That's it. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, and also, so like, and I found the receipt for this. So after my dad died, so there's if you're watching the video, there's a filing cabinet next to me, and there's a lot of my dad's paperwork in there. So like my dad, when my parents had the divorce chat with me, and bear in mind at this point, I knew my mum was in a relationship with someone else, but I was supposed to be hiding that from my dad, and I was about 12. So just throw all those in there. But like my dad was like, you know, I'm sorry this happened. He said, but I'll take you to Liverpool, because I was a big Beatles fan. I'll take you to Liverpool. We'll go there and do all that, you know. And he did. And that for me was magical. And then so when I was going through his stuff, I found the receipts for all of that trip in like perfect mint condition, you know, all the little leaflet for the hotel we stayed in and stuff. And that was an act of kindness, you know, a huge act of kindness. And to find that it meant a lot to him too, to find those things. And then the mad bit, the kind of filmic bit of my life was, so I'm a big Beatles fan, but I was lucky enough to play Paul McCartney in this show that toured the country, and we played the Liverpool Empire. So obviously, I mean, you know yourself. Me telling you this when quite clearly, scales are ridiculous. Me telling you this story, but yeah. So we were on the Beatles story bus, on the Magical Mystery Tour bus when I was a kid with my dad, and I remember them saying, oh, in this Liverpool Empire, the Beatles played there like 9 or 10 times. And when I was about 21, 22, I was playing Paul McCartney in this show, playing the Liverpool Empire, and my dad came to see it. And you're just like, that I would never, ever have dreamt. This was only my second job out of drama school. I was playing my hero in the city, in the theatre where he played himself. And my dad was there, and my mum was too, but in the audience. And that was only a few years on from when he took me there as a kid. So all of that is part of the same thing, I think. And also, like, in the same way that my dad took me to there, he bought me a guitar, and that was the thing that meant that I could end up in that place. So
wow,
I got there because of him, and that would never have happened if it weren't for his support. And like you say, it's very true. I do think he stepped away to try and reduce drama, because he dealt with the same sort of degree of drama from my mum as well to some degree. So he was just, it was an act of kindness. And like I say, when he asked me that question about, did you feel I abandoned you? That was an incredibly brave thing to ask. And no, I didn't. I never felt that. Yeah. So I have to remind myself those little moments, you know what I mean? Because you do forget. And then you go, that's kind of magical, that whole thing. That's kind of madness,
David, can I ask, reflecting on your life thus far, who's the most important person?
So in my life, who's the most important person, do you mean? Or in life generally? Or
who's the most important person in your life?
Well, my wife is. And I'm not just saying that, but because, she's my closest friend, and also she got me through so much.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there.
Okay.
If I said you're wrong, if I said the most important person in your life is you, how would you respond to that?
I'd get it.
Go on.
You know what I mean? I get it, and I go, yep. But, and I don't know if this is just the way that I'm programmed, or that, I would reflexively not agree with you about myself. But then I go, I know I do that, I know. And this is the thing, I think, with a lot of the situation I was in when I was growing up, you weren't the main part in your own film. You were like an incidental part. You know what I mean? And so now, gradually, I'm bringing it round to being about me and my wife, I suppose, as opposed to sort of trying to almost, hide, not have anyone see you as the main part.
Yeah.
Which again, I mean, is why I then stand on stage and talk about it is madness. If I don't even, if I privately don't see myself as being the main character or whatever, why am I doing it publicly? But I don't know. Yeah, it's not the hell. I suppose it's a bit like you were saying about like not talking about death and the rest of it. It's the same sort of thing, isn't it? You keep sort of denying these important things. You know what I mean? And you actually should. If we spend a little bit more time being honest about those things, and it would be less. We might get to a more positive place more quickly.
I think one of the reasons why we don't talk about those things honestly is because it's so painful.
Yeah.
There's no getting away from that. It hurts.
Yeah.
It's painful, and it's not a segue to the title, but we put that pain in a locker and hope that nobody ever sees it. Most of all, ourselves.
Yeah, and that can cause a lot of damage.
Absolutely.
If you chose a bit more about the things to put in that locker, do you know what I mean? That I'm doing you no good. The things that say you're not worthwhile, all those things. Put that in the locker. Don't put you know what I mean? The fact you feel that in the locker. Put that as a thought in there, because that's not doing you any good, And so but it's it's the thing we don't do in life, isn't it? Even at school and stuff, you don't do. I mean, they do more now, but you don't really do stuff about the most important stuff, which is like how to look after yourself. You know, what's healthy and what's the right thing to do. We just don't do that, and it's the same as not talking about death. It's the same as any of it, and it just then causes a lot of things you have to unpick later on in life, doesn't it? And you know, keeps therapists in work, if nothing else.
Well, yeah.
I don't know.
If you were talking to your younger self, what piece of advice would you offer? And this isn't a therapy session.
No.
It's just a bridge.
When I was a kid and the stuff that was going on, I didn't feel like I could get out of it. And I think because at that time, you can't control the parameters because you're a kid. So one thing I'd say personally to me is, this will pass. This time will end and you will get out the other side of it, which could also apply to depression, you know. But I don't know, really. That's the main thing. And to be kinder to yourself is a really important thing.
Self-compassion.
Yeah, and it's, again, another one of those standard images they use, but like, you know, when you're on a plane and it's crashing, put the mask on yourself before you put on other people, you know, so you can then help other people. Looking after yourself and being kind to yourself is so important, because when you catch yourself, like, I'll do stupid little things, like I'll, you know, carrying a cup of tea and I'll spill a bit and I'll go, you fucking idiot. You know what I mean? And you're like, imagine if I said that to my wife, you fucking idiot, you just spilled that tea, you know, but yet you find yourself just all the time doing that, don't you?
Absolutely. What's the nicest thing you've done for yourself recently, for you recently? And if you don't give me an answer, we're going to end this now and you're going to go and do something nice for yourself.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, nothing's springing to mind, so that probably does say a lot. But I've noticed that things like stupid things like taking my dog out for a walk. For a long time, that was when I was going over all this crap that was going on constantly and not being present on the dog walk. And then when you actually go, well, do you know what? If I'm actually just here, this is a really nice place I'm in, like the like fields and stuff around where we live and stuff, and being with the dog. And also, because funny enough with the dog, my dad, so I got the dog around the last year of my dad's life. And as he got more ill, the one thing he did sort of respond to was the dog when he came over. You know, he loved him and stuff. So yeah, doing things like that, just going out with the dog. Not like, I also used to be very driven, even by writing and stuff. Everything had to be turned into work. And I was always trying to write. I used to do a blog and I did it every day for a couple of years and kept it up for 9 or 10 years. Now I don't do it so often. And it's always about like doing stuff all the time, and actually not doing stuff is really valuable as well.
Absolutely. Do you know
what I mean? Just like reading for a bit, or like, you know, just not doing things. You don't have to fill every second with something. So actually going offline almost, do you know what I mean? And that's one of the kind of things I've done to myself, I think. But yeah, we probably should do more things, more good things for ourselves. I'd like to have a more direct answer next time you ask me that question.
Definitely. And you know, it's you being extremely brave. Let me take that. You haven't been brave, you've been honest. Being honest on what you've spoke about is powerful.
Thank you. And
it's resonated with me.
Cool. Well, that's good. Just honesty, you know, what I don't know. When you learn that the world doesn't end, do you know what I mean? When you say that stuff, that's a real positive. And yeah, it's been really good to talk to you. And yeah.
David, thank you for your time here in the Hurt Locker.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Hurt Locker. Please give us a rating or share with another listener. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Hurt Locker Pod.